My name is Jalila Abdul Brown. I am the founder and executive director of Change Starts With Community, a nonprofit that houses a gender-based violence prevention program and then also a health-based food shelf. My sister was shot in the city of Minneapolis, and so that sparked my passion to do this work. And when she got shot, there was little support. So I learned from her that she couldn't be the only one. We saw in Minneapolis there were a lot of resources for young men, programs, housing, jobs, ways to get out of violence, but there was nothing for the women. To see their lives change, for me, is the biggest impact. And that is how you know that what the Minneapolis Foundation is doing is making an impact, not just in buildings, but it's making an impact in our communities. And when we change our communities, we change families. I won't stop until I continue to see this gun violence and the assaults and the trauma against women in the city of Minneapolis go down. I'll be here. I'll be fighting for us to live.
Hey, I want to welcome everybody to You and the Law podcast show. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, Virgil Green, and my co-host is Keith Humphrey, but he is known all around podcast land as Chief Swaggy One.
What's going on, man? Hey, good evening to the listeners. Hey, first of all, I would be remiss if I did not wish you happy 79th birthday. So, happy birthday, man. Would you like me to sing it to you?
Really, 79? Yeah, go ahead and sing it. Yeah, since you said 79, because if I'm 79, it means you're 80.
Well, yeah, okay. People know better than that. But anyway, happy birthday, brother.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Yeah. So you just celebrated a birthday as well.
Yeah. Like always, Virgil, you're almost a month and a half late.
So that means you're older than I am.
About a few months. You know, we're 20.
So that means you're older than me, and you're older than our guest that we have on tonight. This special guest we have on.
I will. Okay. Yeah, I'm older than
her. Well, hey, everybody, we have a special guest that's joining us, and it is Mrs. Brown. She is the executive director for an organization up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so we want to thank you for taking the time to come on and join us on our podcast and let our listeners know what you're doing in Minneapolis, because you have been involved with a lot of great community events in Minneapolis. And so we want you to tell our listeners and us more about Ms. Brown.
Hello, everyone, and then happy birthday.
Thank you.
To you as well. I don't think y'all that old. Y'all don't look that old, at least. They say black don't crack, but you know.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Y'all, you aging gracefully. So I am Jalila Abdul Brown. I am the executive director of Change Starts With Community, based in the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County. It is an organization that deals with a lot of women and girls who have been impacted by gun violence first, and then assault and stabbings within the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County. To say that our caseload is off the charts right now is an understatement. But then also our organization has a has the only health-based food shelf in the city of Minneapolis. It's a health equity food shelf. And the reason we opened that is during the COVID-19, we saw in North Minneapolis that majority of the people that were dying were people of color. and we looked around and all we saw was McDonald's and something fried around us. So we did something about it. So the organization houses two programs: a gender-based violence prevention program, and then also a health equity food program. So that is what we have going on in the city of Minneapolis.
Okay. Well, you know, in the video that we showed, opening up the show, talked about, you know, the things that you're involved with your organization, and obviously how you personally have been impacted by the violence in Minneapolis that involved your sister. So, you know, I think it's really important to have this conversation about, you know, how gun violence impacts the Black community. And, you know, for people that live up in the Minneapolis, in the Twin Cities area, they are pretty familiar with the gun violence, just like it is in other major cities. But since I've been up here, and as we were talking the other day, Julie, just how it is really, you know, increased, or is this something that has kind of always been this way in the Minneapolis Twin City areas?
I would say, I mean, in the 90s, we were known as the Murder-apolis. I would say this crime is worser. Here's why. Number one, we dealt with, as a society, as a human race, we dealt with a pandemic, right? That locked us all down. I would say that the crime wave was already there behind this pandemic. And then we have to add on George Floyd happening and the riots also in the city of Minneapolis. So we had a pandemic and then a racial riot that happened that tore down the city of Minneapolis drastically. A lot of landmarks that used to be there are no longer there because they were burned down during the riot. So what that did, it to me, it just exacerbated Black Americans being disproportionately impacted by gun violence already, right? So what it did was it added on. We had people coming here from out of town. A lot of people that even burned down stuff here in Minneapolis were not even from our city. So that added on. We had a lot of foreigners coming here. So a lot of that impact and add on to the violence. But what happened is we had a lot of guns and a lot of drugs flood our city at the same time. I don't think that we were prepared for the amount of guns and drugs that came in behind the riots and the pandemic. We were not prepared for it.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that you say that the city was not prepared, or just citywide, the Minneapolis was not prepared for that, because, and I, you know, Keith and Julie, I don't think people realize the pandemic and then the incident with George Floyd. And the incident with George Floyd was just as big as the pandemic, because it spread all across every 50 states in the United States. It spread it worldwide with all of the protesting that was going on. So, you know, I think when you really think about it, you really have to put that in the context of the pandemic and then George Floyd and then the riots that took place. And that all of these things kind of was, you know, it just like a domino effect. But you and everybody else who lived in Minneapolis dealt with it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, we did, and we still are. So my degree is in mental health. So my degree is in psychology and administration of children, youth, and family programs. And with my degree, when I began to deal with victims of gun violence, I was able to see the mental health piece that was missing behind the bullet. And so as we were watching a lot of people recovering, when I say we, I mean, it takes all of us to prevent gun violence, right? So the city of Minneapolis began to roll out initiatives, and Sasha Cotton, who's no longer the director, she did a great job with pulling me in and different ones in so that we could start a community aspect, which was the violence interrupters, right? So what we didn't see was a community trusted piece to go along with the police, right, as credible messengers to go back to their own communities and say, hey, let's stop tearing down our community. I've been there before. and people that they trust, right? Because one thing about communities of color, if we don't know you, we don't trust you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just a known fact about communities of color. So we had to send credible people back into these communities to become violence interrupters, to become basically what we would call peacemakers on side of the officers. But these are credible people from their communities. Now, what we begin to see is that the impact of effectiveness that this was having in the community. But then we also have the next step, which is the hospital-based program. That is a hospital-based violence intervention program, which when someone gets shot, like I told you, all of us got the first 48 to try to prevent retaliation. So you got a hospital team, you got a violence interrupter team, you have GVI, which is group violence intervention. They are intervening with the groups to say, hey, you guys don't retaliate. You got me when I see the young ladies and the mothers in the streets. Hey, I need you guys not to retaliate. You got Shiloh Temple. You have New Salem. You have A Mother's Love. You have We Push for Peace. So you have Touch Outreach. You have so many of us, right, coming together in the first 48 to try to prevent recidivism and retaliation.
Yeah. Well, Julie, you mentioned We Push for Peace. We actually had on, as I mentioned to you previously, we had on We Push for Peace and talked about all of the things, how they stood up in front on the lines with police officers at the 3rd Precinct, I believe, and really help de-escalate that tension between the police and the community. So, there's a lot of things that so many different groups and organizations do behind the scenes that typically don't get that media attention as some of the other things that have happened.
Hey, Sister Abdul Brown, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. So what I'm hearing you say, and I've said this for at least 2 years, that you all have in Minneapolis, the African American community and your nonprofits and civic organizations have realized that the violent crime is a public health issue. Because I noticed you talked about mental health and you talked about medical response, things like that. So how did you get the community to buy into the public health issue? Because there are some cities that the leaders within the city don't want to hear that, or they don't understand that. So how did you get the citizens of your community to understand and buy into the fact that it takes more than just the police to help us in reducing violent crimes?
I would say, ironically, Chief Arredondo, he's no longer, of course, the chief of the city of Minneapolis, but he was awesome in believing in that vision, right? In that mission, him being, of course, a Black man from himself, right? Growing up in the city of Minneapolis, because that's where I know him from. I grew up around him as a young girl. So to see him become the police chief, I was like, wow, Arredondo's the chief. But what he understood was when they were arresting people, when you talk to some of them, they didn't even realize they killed somebody. And it was like, are you serious? And it was like they wasn't playing, it was real. So we took the approach to say, okay, then we need to start treating gun violence, right? We did the research, which if you look at the CDC, they have a lot of research. We don't look at stuff that hasn't worked, right? We look at what has already worked, and then we work what's already working, right? So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So when you look at the CDC, they had a whole spiel on gun violence being a public health issue. So Director Sasha Cotton, once again, she was big on that. She ran with it. We ran with that. And what we noticed is when we start getting to the root of the gun violence, right? Saying, hey, if we can cure disease, then we can cure gun violence, right? But how do we do that? We do that by getting to what made you shoot someone in the first place, or why did you get shot? So we got to get to the root. Some of them, it was, I had nothing to eat. For some of them, it was, I had nowhere to stay, so I had to hang on the corner, right? So then we're looking at living situations. We're looking at basic needs such as food, Then we're looking at jobs. So it's a known public health fact that wherever you have less resources, you have more violence. So when we looked at the communities in Minneapolis, which predominantly were communities of colors, like the 38th Street area, my dad's church is on the corner of where George Floyd happened at, Worldwide Outreach for Christ. So that happened right in front of his church. And I'm a pastor, by the way, also. But that just kind of thrust all of us in the middle of something that we had no idea this was going to get this big. So we couldn't look at it the same. We had to look at it as, number one, this gun violence is a public health issue, and then also racism. So a lot of that added on to the violence that we're seeing right now.
So let me ask you this: why is it so difficult that a young sister like you sees that? And I know you talked about your minister, your background in psychology and things like that. Why can we not get more? Why can we not get the federal government and our states to understand? I know the answer, but why is it that no one will step up and say that this is a public health? We need more money, and I don't know why we. I don't understand why that is so hard for people to say. It was the same as COVID. It's been the same. It's a public health issue. People are dying by the thousands. And so it's just, why can we not? From what I gather, and we had another guest on from Minneapolis, and you guys on top of it. Y'all on top of it. You call it what it is, and that's the only way to fix it. So why do you think we just can't get any momentum with that?
I think because, number one, you have to not also make law enforcement feel like their jobs are threatened, right? It has to be looked at like we have the approach in Minneapolis. It takes all of us to prevent violence. When you have a group coming against and saying, well, we want to basically disband officers, we don't want to work with officers, but we want to protect our community, then that becomes more threatened versus saying, hey, we need the officers, but we are going to stand in the gap where the officers may not go in certain areas where they won't be welcome, but we will, right? Does that mean that we are a double agent? Absolutely not, right? Because we don't work for law enforcement, but we can work alongside of them, right? And then it's easier for a victim to talk to us and say, a survivor to talk to us and say, hey, this happened to me. As a matter of fact, we've been able to get a lot of crime solved because of the victims trusting us, and then us giving them that confidence that if you do go to the police, we'll make sure that nothing happens to you, right? That the community is not going to just spit you up and eat you up. I think it needs to be an approach where we begin to look at, in other states from the federal government. I know Biden just passed that law. I think that's the first step, right? In us getting to look at violence as a public health issue, because that's the way he's looking at it now. I believe that when we go down through the state system and we begin to look at laws and policies, it needs to be written in where grant and monies are going to community organizations who are also willing to, like I said, not work for the police, but work with the police to be able to have our communities be healthy, happy, and thriving.
You said something that I hope the listeners caught on to. You said something really interesting about McDonald's and all the fast food restaurants and things in the community. You see those type of establishments in our community, and don't get me wrong, you have people of color that own those that do own those restaurants. Mm-hmm. But it does get a little frustrating when you see another liquor store open, when you see another convenience store open, and it gets to the point where people who look like us believe that they can't do any better than to go to the corner convenience store or eat McDonald's, or there's not a place where a family can go and sit down and have a meal, an affordable meal and things like that. So I don't know if the listeners caught that. I was listening to that, and I truly believe that you have to have that environment where people feel as though you care. I truly believe that diet is a part of it, is a contributing factor to it. When you have that access to McDonald's and the access to Taco Bell and access to liquor stores and things like that, and when you go to a convenience store, a can of soup is $3.50. I mean, that those things do affect, and those are quality of life issues. And if they're not to a point where people feel as though they're respected, it can be a problem.
Yeah. Well, Ms. Brown, one of the things that we talked about on the podcast show before is this report was put out, 1968, Keith, the Kerner's Commission report?
Kerner Commission, yeah.
Yeah. And so in that report,
67.
In that report, Julie, it talked about the things that we're experiencing in pretty much in every city in America now. So what, 50 something years later, you have people, communities who are dealing with the same issues that they talked about in 1967. They talked about poverty, they talked about crime, they talk about the relationship between law enforcement and the Black communities, the riots that took place back in the 60s. And so you got to ask yourself, if they knew about these things in 1967 when this Kerner Commission report came out, why didn't anything change? You still kind of see the same type of neighborhoods where people that look like me and you don't own the stores in those communities. And if there are people who look like us, a lot of people don't go to them, but they go to those other stores. And so all of those things factor into the quality of life. But one of the things that's missing from that is how has the police played a role in that? Because a lot of times, the only thing that police officers think about is enforcing the law. They don't think about the quality of life because they don't live in those communities.
Wow, I'm glad both of you guys have real great points. I'm glad you brought up the quality of life, right, and the food, because what we were seeing, we saw people in North Minneapolis killing each other over food. Okay, I was like, something has to give. So I spoke with Bishop Howell, who is the pastor. He's the senior pastor and bishop of Shiloh Temple in North Minneapolis. His church is located in the middle, right, of the biggest Black community. And him and his wife have such a heart for the community that I went to him and I said, hey, can we open up a food shelf? And I'm like, it's going to be a health equity food shelf. He was like, you know what, let me pray, because you always want to do something big, right? So he prayed, he came back. He said, let's roll. He said, well, where you going to get the money from? Look, I didn't have a clue where I was going to get this money from or how I was going to build the space out. I made some phone calls to the state. I got a few friends. The governor's one of them. I made some phone calls. They had they sent out architects. Now, this how you know the systemic was there, right? It's so many resources that the Black community never has access to. It's not that we don't want them. We don't have access to them, right?
Yeah.
So I went to them. They sent the architect for free. I began to work with Foundations for Essential Needs. We began to work with the state of Minnesota, the city of Minneapolis, and they realized that in that big area right there, North Minneapolis had the 5th largest food desert in America. Can you guys believe that? In America. What? In America.
Now say that again.
They had the 5th largest food desert in America.
Wow.
In America, okay? In the whole United States. I could not believe that. So they up there with the slums of Chicago. So when I began to really look into this and really divulge into it, of course, North Minneapolis was redlined, right? So when you look at, like you said, the report, that was already perpetuating and letting you know, we know that this is going to happen. Why? Because the systemic racism, right? These systems were already set up to redline these certain neighborhoods. So if we look at this same neighborhood 30 to 50 years from now, and we don't provide any resources, this community will remain the same, right?
Yeah.
So even when it comes to policing, what we begin to do when we open up the food shelf, the first thing we begin to do was bring in law enforcement partners. Why do we do that? Because you can't just police our communities without becoming a part of our community.
Exactly.
So the one to sign on was because the city of Minneapolis, they right now they are short. Everyone knows that this is no secret, right? That they need more manpower, right? So instead of us boggling them down, we went to the Hennepin County Sheriffs. They said, hey, we rolling, right? They put even together a community team. They came out, you guys, helped us set everything up, helped us put away all the food, and helped us serve the community. But this is what I love. Who came on board that we needed was Cargill. Why did we need Cargill? Cargill is like the biggest agriculture producer in the world, right? And they're based right out of here, out of Minneapolis. I mean, out of Minnesota, Wayzata. So by them signing on, it was putting an official stamp to say, we believe in this vision and we believe that we can bring up this community if we provide the resources that we historically have not provided.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and you know, we've got, I want to get to this comment in the chat room, guys. Chanel Smith, she says, plus she said, we shouldn't be dependent on them to put resources in our communities. We need to do that ourselves. Police presence is meant for intimidation, not really to keep any safe. This is, she said, that's just her opinion, but look at the history of police. So, you know, when you look at the history of police and how policing has been over the past decades, there are a lot of things, as we know, police can do a lot better job at what they do and how they are involved in communities. You know, Jalita, I've met somebody, I don't know if you know, his name is Tyrone Terrell. Very involved in the Minneapolis community, St. Paul community. And, you know, he was sharing with me, there was a homicide that took place in St. Paul, and his organization, the group that he is involved with, they had reached out to this person who was a witness to this homicide, reached out and said, I will only turn myself in to you and not the police. And so they went and got this young man, brought him back to St. Paul, and they turned him over to the police. But that just goes to show you that there is a lot of people who do have a partnership with law enforcement. But what's even really good to see is that law enforcement allows those organizations to really be involved with helping solve crimes and helping people who are witnesses to crimes, giving them a safe place to talk.
Yeah, I think I believe it's necessary, right? So Alice White, who is under you now, right?
Yeah.
Before she went to Golden Valley, and even still now, she still come over and see us, but she always helped Shiloh Temple, and she always helped me with a lot of different programs and different programming and different events that we would put on, right? So that people could see her in the community. When we had the biggest funerals, like Dante Wright funeral, she was there with us, right? Helping to secure the community. When we have funerals at Shiloh Temple, the church, Alice was always there helping to secure the parameter. Why do we need relationship with law enforcement? You are going to need public safety, right? So if you look at even some of these violence interrupters we have, they are not legally, they are civilians. You cannot legally arrest anyone. So if something happens, right, and you need law enforcement, that is not your lane, right? You need law enforcement. So when it comes to a credible witness in the community, that's not law enforcement's lane. You need credible people who are from those communities, who the community trusts to have those relationships, to be able to, you know, bring something to close. So that's why you have to have, I like to say, the partnership relationship. So that way it's not looked at as though the police is our superiority, because once again, we don't work for the police, right? So I can choose to say, I'm not telling the police anything. So that's why you got to have, it has to be a partnership versus I am superior to you, and because I said this, you're going to do it. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's been the problem with policing all along, is that having that authority to tell somebody either you do what I tell you to do, and if you don't do it, I'm gonna take you to jail. And so you don't get anywhere with that. And one of the things that Alice shared with me was, when you talk about the Dante Wright funeral and even the George Floyd funeral, where she shared that there was some times where she just told her people that she worked with, you don't need to come here. I've got this. And so she was pretty much doing that all by herself, because she knew if others came in, that would just kind of agitate the crowd. And now you're going to, instead of de-escalating something, you're going to escalate it just by the mere presence of those officers. And that's something that these guys don't understand, is that their mere presence will escalate a situation versus them de-escalating a situation. So,
it's funny. I listened to the young lady that we have on the show today, and you can tell the passion. Sometimes you can see that there's people who just do stuff for attention, but you can tell she's all in. And so let me ask you this. So do you think have you found that any of those young men or women who are suspects or who have committed these crimes, if you have a chance to talk to them, do they understand the seriousness of this, or is there something that do you find that there is some good in those young adults?
I would say some of them, yes, right. But some of them, it was all about the get back, right? It was like, man, until I get my lick back, I won't rest. So you have some of them who just like that. They just that adamant to get their lick back, right? I remember when we was young, we used to play tag, and until I caught the person, it's like, man, I'm not giving up until I get you back, right? Tag you it. So you got some of them that just got that tag mindset, like I'm not gonna stop until I tag this person, right? But then you got some of them that really are remorseful, like I don't know what I was thinking. Take for instance one young boy who did a homicide. He had college scholarships, right? And so we were able to talk to him in the church, like, man, turn yourself in. And it was just a big thing that, somebody in our church was able to talk to this young man and have him turn himself in. And then he went to someone from the community, Reverend McAfee, and the young boy, went and turned himself in, right? So that just lets you know how valuable these relationships are that we have within our community. And the young boy, the homicide that he committed was against one of the girl's sons that I grew up with, that I watched his baby be born, right? And then I had to watch him take his last breath. So those cases are tough. I can't even count how many people I've watched die in the last 3 years. It's been so many of them, right? So I've had to bury people's children that's in the church with me, right? And I don't think people realize the impact that this has on families. Sometimes some families don't have life insurance, right, to bury their children. And what I like to keep is a fund, a burial fund, so that I'm able to help these families not struggle. And unfortunately, most of them I do know, because I grew up in the city of Minneapolis, in Hennepin County. I know the rocks of the city, right? I know Minneapolis, Golden Valley, Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, all the close suburbs, St. Paul. Why? Because we consider the Twin Cities, right? So when you have that type of connection, and my mother also was an activist. My brother is now a violence interrupter. So we come from a family doing this type of work, right? But then we've also caused havoc on the city, right? So we've been on both sides. So when you see families, that impact of that bullet financially, sometimes when some of these young men and women get shot, they had jobs. Their jobs fire them. And I've seen the difference when I've had Caucasian people get shot. A lot of their jobs will hold their place.
Yeah.
But when African Americans get shot, let's take my sister, for example. Her job fired her, right?
Because she got shot.
Yeah, because she got shot, right? The bullet wasn't even meant for her. So the thing is that the financial implication, right, from burying somebody to just them having to recover, do physical therapy. Some of them never recover, right? They never gain their walk back. I got girls right now who still on crutches, that they will never walk again without crutches, right? So these are young ladies that are permanently disabled for the rest of their lives. They didn't wake up that day and say, hey, today is the day that I'm gonna be, it's gonna change for the rest of it. Here come a bullet. They didn't wake up like that, right? And so a lot of these young men, they don't wake up like that. So I think people don't realize even the financial implication of a bullet. It takes a lot of Black families into poverty where they struggle to pay their rent. And that sound you guys hear, that is me getting a call. I'm hoping nobody got shot, but
okay.
Yeah, that's what that is. So basically, we have to really divulge into the aspects and the financial trauma behind a bullet, right? Then you have the social emotional trauma behind a bullet, and a lot of people that don't eat healthy diets, their cognitive thinking is off, and that's why I was trying to change the trajectory of what we eat, because what you eat is tied to your decision making, right?
Exactly.
Up in South Minneapolis, which was more of a mixed area, which it was like diverse, more you saw white people and Black people. The neighborhood I grew up in was Native American and Blacks. The neighborhood my dad's church is on 38th in Chicago is Black, right? So it's pockets of Minneapolis that's Black that you're not gonna see Caucasian, or what I like to say, white people living in the same neighborhoods as us, right? But like you see a corner store with bad food. So then they have to spend $4 at the corner store buying potato chips when that's $4 in the grocery store would have got them at least maybe some chicken and some vegetables that would have gave them more nutritious eating that could have helped their thinking, right? This stuff is like really real. So I love that y'all talk about what's tied to what. It's a web. I like to call it the spider web, right? When somebody gets shot, finances is tied to that bullet. Somebody gets shot, you have social emotional tied to that bullet. When somebody gets shot, you got where they live tied to that bullet. Some of these people, you guys, cannot go back into their homes, right? Then here's the other piece of the web. It's 5 pieces. Then you got their family members tied to that bullet, right? Then you got then you got what they eat tied to that bullet. So those are 5 different things, the web that is tied to one bullet.
And people don't realize that.
Yeah, young sister, I call it collateral damage. You call it the spider web. Absolutely, there's so many people affected when they do that, and I don't think people realize that. And then let's don't talk about people playing on their emotional states. We talk about if you do have someone who is killed, you do have those services that are there's price gouging when it comes to those services. Then how do you pay this? How do you pay this hospital bill? You know, how do you pay this hospital bill? You're absolutely right. People won't hold jobs for people, and it does just cause us a reciprocal problem. And how do you get out of that? It's like a merry-go-round. How do you get off that merry-go-round when it's spinning so fast? I'm gonna be honest with you. I didn't realize that there was the large African American population in the Twin Cities until we started having some meetings in Minneapolis. Didn't realize that. And then, you know, of course, the tragedy of George Floyd, that really showed the nation, man, Minneapolis is diverse. It is. What's the population of African Americans in Minneapolis?
I would say it's like 20 to 30%.
Wow.
It used to be about 5%, right? So I just want to let people know we here.
Right. So is that including the Somalian population, or that's strictly the?
If we include them, then yeah, we're looking at about like 35% of Black African. They African. They not going to discard them. They going, oh, they Somali. They don't know the difference.
Right.
Yeah, because they
looking at them like they're Somali American, but they are African. So yeah.
I tell you, I you know, man, Virgil, you got another good one, man.
Hey, man.
This is the thing.
Let me tell you, this is how I connected with her, man. This was all a conversation on LinkedIn where I read one of her posts that she had posted, and then I saw something where something took place at a Minnesota Vikings game, I believe. And I saw that, and I sent her a message hoping that she would reply. She did. And so this is just stepping outside and really connecting with people since I've been up here in the Minneapolis area. And so here we are. We have her on as a guest. So it's been good.
Well, she said something earlier too. I'm listening to every word. I'm sitting here, but she said that they raise havoc, call them havoc. Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
A lot of city governments need to have that. They need to be they need to be woken up, and they need to have a dose of reality, because there is a perception, which is our reality, that there are certain parts of the community that don't receive equitable services, equitable funding, and things like that. And let's just in my former employer, the mayor signed we were able to secure $1.5 million to prevent violent crime, and part of that was counseling. And one of the directors called the mayor out and said that he didn't want to fund a Hug a Thug program.
Oh wow!
And let me tell you,
a Hug a Thug program.
Oh wow!
He got his butt brought to him. He got his butt brought to him because basically you're saying that, and then this is something else that happens. You have the violent crime in the African American community, and then but there's no programs. But then you have politicians that want to use that as a stepping stone. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. I really care about the community, but never go to a funeral, never go to a wake, never go to a prayer vigil, nothing. Never go to a school to speak. But then they'll step on the back, stand on the shoulders of those people who have been victims of violent crime in order to, and that is just I don't get that. But we have to continue to fight. And you said something earlier about first, I think it may have been you talking about law enforcement officers not living in the city. Well, you know where I worked before, 65% of the officers, 70% of the officers did not live in the city, but they took the city's resources and they used the city's resources, but they had no desire to participate in any of the programs in the community, especially with the African American community. So I know that firsthand that happened.
Yeah. Hey guys, I want to remind our listeners that we've got on the guest tonight, Jalila Abdullah-Brown, the Executive Director with Change Starts with Community. And tonight we're talking about the impact of gun violence in the Black community. And I've got another clip I want to show to you guys and to our listeners.
Is one of the most problematic corners in the city of Minneapolis.
West Broadway and Lyndale Avenue, it's been a concern as a magnet for crime for years, particularly at two businesses. And we're learning right now another shooting at that intersection in the last 30 minutes.
Our Babs Santos joins us live now. So Babs, this shooting coming just hours after residents expressed their concerns.
Yeah, only hours before this latest shooting at a meeting earlier today, people questioned how many more people will have to die or be injured before something is done about this intersection.
The dead bodies are happening here, the violence is happening. And this is a very challenging neighborhood, and we all know that.
Frustrated neighbors are saying enough is enough and demanding answers now after years of bloodshed on the corner of Lyndale and Broadway, a notorious intersection in Minneapolis's Hawthorne neighborhood.
They're doing drugs on our field. They're over there dancing naked outside the windows. The kids are scared to come to school because they get propositioned on the corner. They be offered drugs. They've been robbed at gunpoint for their cell phones.
Next door to the intersection inside Sanctuary Church, on Tuesday night, some went as far as to call it a public health crisis, calling on the city to move in and take the licenses of two businesses seen as a safe haven for the crime, Merwin Liquor Store and the Winter Gas Station.
But when you got a liquor store right there. And then you got a murder station, what they call, that sells all the paraphernalia. We have to get businesses in the community that will help the community and the people in the community.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison is investigating the businesses for their possible role in creating a public nuisance, and the city is gathering evidence and witness statements to potentially prove that in court. But neighbors want to see action now, calling on the city to buy the businesses and shut them down.
There's no reason why the business should exist.
Minneapolis' new Commissioner of Public Safety, Cedric Alexander, says all hands are on deck to find a solution.
These new establishments, Winter Gas Station and Merwin's, quite frankly, are going to have to do more. They owe this community a lot, and they need to do more.
And tonight, city leaders were really limited on their answers to these questions, they say, because of the ongoing investigation to determine if these businesses are truly to blame for all that's going on, or if they're just being made a scapegoat. Live in Minneapolis, Babs Santos, Fox 9.
Hey guys, I think, that's a great segue back into the conversation as we talk about the impact of gun violence in the Black community. And Jalila, I know you know all about that intersection, that area right there, and the fact that, now you got the Attorney General Keith Ellison that is looking into that business and other businesses in that area. And in that clip, you see just people hanging out at these stores. And when people hang out, we know crimes are being committed. So why not have businesses there that are really serving the community versus allowing a space for those to commit crimes?
So when it comes to businesses, I can even let's even go to where George Floyd was killed at, right? So
I was going to say that.
So that area has always, okay, so I grew up in Minneapolis, so I know the city. That area has always been hangout, gang. I can't tell you how many bullets I dodged right there, okay? Going in the store, they shooting again. Okay, we got a duck. They inside the store shooting. I mean, I've been through all of that, okay? So when you get businesses like that, because they were saying, how come they can't buy Cup Foods? It's not that easy. That sounds good, but you can't just basically gangster a business out of their company out of their business, right? It's steps.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't think they've ever looked at the Black community to even say, hey, we're going to bring charges and we're going to look at you guys like you're the nuisance. This has never been done in the city of Minneapolis, ever, especially in the Black community, though. It's been done, but not in the Black community, right? So
okay.
Those two businesses, since I was a little girl, the murder station has been called the murder station. It's called the Winter's Gas Station, okay? We all call it the murder station. It's all I know plenty of guys that got killed right there, okay? I done buried so many people from getting killed right there. It makes no sense. So the thing is that what we're saying is that if you are gonna perpetuate, right, which is you're not gonna hire security to tell them to move, right? You're not gonna put up cameras so that if something happens, the police can pull your cameras, right? You're not going to get into where you are a part of you are part of public safety. If you own a business, you are a part of public safety, whether you like that or not. But for you to allow people to hang on your property, they are selling drugs, they are using drugs, and you not do anything, you are a part of the problem. And the reason I can talk like this is because, of course, you guys know we're right in North Minneapolis, right? And then, like I said, my dad's church is on 38th in Chicago, so I've seen the dynamics of horrible stores. We fought back against one in South Minneapolis, 26 and Cedar, and we got them to pick up the trash out there. We got them to place cameras, and we got them to hire security. Okay, that's your job as a business. That needs to happen because bodies are dropping on where? Your property, right? So I think it is really calling them to the carpet right now and holding them accountable. But this is why I want to give a shout out though to the boots on the ground people who are doing this work, okay? Like a Shiloh Temple, Change Starts with Community, A Mother's Love, New Salem, Touch Outreach, We Push for Peace, and GVI, a lot of teams that are doing this work. Next Step, let me tell you why. This time last year, okay, this is public fact, we had gunfire had injured 420 52 people, okay, this year. Last year around this time, we had about 500 or 600 people injured by gun violence, okay, in Minneapolis.
Wow.
Most of that gunshot came from North Minneapolis, okay, from the Broadway area.
Just those 500 alone.
We had 500 through the entire city, okay?
Okay.
So now we are down, okay? We had about 500 or 600 last year around this time, people injured by gunfire. We are down to 400 this year, okay? If you look at a little bit over 400, if you look at last year around this time, it was reported that more than 600 this year, 6,843 times somebody had reported that they heard gunshots or shots of fire, okay? Last year, were about 8,000.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
So that's a stark difference. That lets you know that when we work together, right, and everybody stay in their lane, but we have a partnership, we can get more done.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's go ahead, Keith.
Too, and Sister Brown, I'll tell you, and I think you'll agree with this. You can always find, when there's crime in an area, you can always narrow it down to one location, one or two locations. That is where the nexus of the crime starts, and then it comes down to 1% of a population, more or less than 1% of that population is keeping this stuff going. One of the best things that a city can have is a nuisance abatement program. And they've got to utilize that nuisance abatement program. Because guess what? If you shut those places down, or you establish fines for those locations, you're hitting the pockets of those owners. And now you're taking money away from them. And now it might even become public, or it might even make national news, and you're going to get negative attention. So you either need to clean it up. And the thing about it is, a lot of the individuals that own those stores don't even live in those communities, so they don't care. Money. We had one in Little Rock. The guy lived 100 miles from Little Rock. He lived 100 miles from Little Rock, and that's just crazy. But I was really glad that the citizens of that area got together, and it was a joint effort between the fire department, public housing, code enforcement, and the police department. And when you pull someone's electrical box, and when you start turning people's water off because they haven't paid their bills and stuff like that, watch and see how quickly it changes. That problem changes. So that's a good thing. And you guys got an amazing commissioner up there. Cedric Alexander is going to be really good for that area.
Yeah, he is. Somebody that both of us know.
He's an amazing guy. So he came to us at Shiloh Temple, right? And, introduced himself. I know him, though, from work he did with Obama. So I'm originally from Chicago. So I grew up in the city of Chicago and the city of Minneapolis. My uncle is the chief judge in the city of Chicago, Timothy C. Evans. So my family is very well politically connected in Chicago as well. So he did a lot of great work with the Obama administration. So I was very well aware of him and who he was. And so when he came here, it was a little resistance at first because people here didn't feel like he understood the public health approach. And the reason why that's so important here is because we don't want to break up or backtrack what we've already started. That's working, right? You don't want anybody coming in that's new. You don't know us and you come in right away trying to change something that's working. So it was a lot of resistance for him at first because his entire background is in law enforcement. But I had to let them know, no, he also has mental health. The reason why that is that needs to be known, and because he understands the impact, right, that people that go through law systems and even law enforcement agencies and people who are law enforcement, he understands what they deal with too, right? And then he's a black man. So it's not like he's been exempt of what America has been going through. I'm sure he had to go through a lot of stuff to go through some ranks, right? So I'm like, just give him a chance. And so he came to Shiloh and he began to speak. And I said, I'm going to record you and I'm going to put you on my LinkedIn, right? And I'm going to get people to buy in, right? And so that's what I did. People start sharing it, right? And we believe, and he really came asking us what we would like to see versus him saying, this is what I'm going to do. You can't come into a city that you know nothing of saying this is what you're going to do. You don't even know the change that needs to happen. right?
Yeah.
And then I want y'all to know this is not down south. This is the bold north, baby. So most of the people
It's a lot different up here.
Chicago, right? Most of the people in Minneapolis are from Chicago. That's just another fact, right? Milwaukee, Chicago, Gary, Cleveland, all these black cities, right? So most of us are from there, and we grew up in Minneapolis. And so that's one thing I think people need to understand about Midwest cities. We are not like Atlanta. Atlanta is so much different than the city of Minneapolis. Like even when I go down there, my sister lives there. I can almost let my hair down in Atlanta. Like, wow, okay. When I'm in Minneapolis, I can let my hair down, but I still got to be like, okay, who is that? What he doing?
Yeah.
Got to do that in Chicago too. Where he at? Why she moving like that? What's she doing? Right? It's more of a I gotta pay attention. In Atlanta, it's more, hey man, they still, even the thugs down there are respectful. I'm just being real. So, North, totally different. They gonna mean mug you, look at you different. They don't know you, they want you to skedaddle immediately, right? So that's just how it is in the North. So I appreciate the fact that he came in, you know, like, what can I do? I think the only area he has to really learn and understand is our public health approach. It's not going anywhere. As I just gave y'all the number, so we know that it's working. The work that outgoing director Sasha Cotton, who was the director of the Office of Violence Prevention, a lot of the initiatives that she put in place, that I helped her put in place, that her team, she has Josh, he is the intern director right now. Josh Peterson, he has a degree in violence prevention, right? So these are people who actually know what they're doing. So I think that's an area. Jen White, I think those are areas that he's also going to have to trust that team and trust a lot of us, because we know what we're doing in that area. And that's why I said the partnership versus coming in and saying, I'm changing this, I'm changing that. That is not going to work here in Minnesota.
Yeah. Hey, I got a question to ask you.
So Virgil will be pushing that in also.
Oh, yeah. Hey, I've got a question to ask you. Goes back to the store situation. We all watched everything that took place up here in Minneapolis, but the one store that, in my opinion, kind of started the whole George Floyd thing, the Cub Food store, nothing happened. They're the ones who called the police to even get this started. So why did that store survive in stores like Target and stores, all these other businesses were burned down? But why did that store survive? Because to me, you would think people would take their frustrations out on that store versus taking something out on a store that had nothing to do with what happened to George Floyd.
Well, once again, we just talked about, people coming in that were not from our city. So a lot of that damage that happened in the city of Minneapolis were not done by residents and people who grew up and who live in the city of Minneapolis. That matters, right?
Yeah.
Most of the stores that got burned down, the people you saw in the news were not even from Minneapolis, like at all. They were from different states, right?
They were kind of bussed in, yeah.
Yeah, they were from different states, and then some of them were from like way out Elk River. Like, what are you doing in Minneapolis? Go back to Elk River, right? So they were coming from these different areas to perpetuate, to make it look at these people of color, African Americans and Native Americans and indigenous people, they burning their city down. When it really wasn't that. Now, did some people that live in Minneapolis burn the city down? Yes, they did, right? But it's like, if you ignore the cry of somebody too long, then a riot is their way of saying, do you hear us now? Yeah. I'm a total believer of that, right? So my thing is, I believe Cup Food survived because now I know what they did personally, because I was out there. They had people who were from that neighborhood, okay, police their store. They tried to burn their store down a lot of times. It was several times that they store was doused in gasoline and everything, okay? But because that family, who I know very well, a lot of their kids grew up in the city of Minneapolis. What they did, they linked and connected with some of the guys that grew up in the city. Some of them was game bangers. They said, hey, I'll give y'all some money if y'all could secure the store. Here's where Minneapolis is, okay? We was defund the police, and it was forget the police, and who is the police? So now when the police even pull up now, people throw rocks at them. They throw bottles at them. They throw guns at them. Like it was a shooting the other day over Northeast. The man that think twice about shooting at the police, right? What happened is after that, we got a spirit of lawlessness, right?
Okay.
City. So even with Cup Foods, they had people who some of them had no business having a gun, okay, securing their store. But because they did do that, their store survived being burned down because it was several times that people tried to burn their store down. So I would say, did they really recover from George Floyd? No, they didn't, right? Because their customer base went down drastically because a lot of people, I don't know if you guys know that, don't even want to go to 38. 38th was thriving. Okay, that's an area that my dad, his church, Worldwide Outreach for Christ, we had outreach teams over there. Like he really, and our team really built that area up. Like it was thriving, right? But then they tried to gentrify the area, okay? So what happened is the people who lived over there, some of them had no problem with letting it burn. So that's the reason why they can't even right now open the street up all the way. So you really are dealing with hurt, you're dealing with trauma, you're dealing with the perpetuation of systemic racism, and then now you're dealing with lawlessness and mental health and drug addiction. Yeah. It's so many layers now that first we were dealing with like 2 things, now we're dealing with like 10 different things, and the police cannot get a grip on that alone. It's going to really take all of us.
Exactly. Hey guys, we're coming up on the last few seconds of the podcast show, and Jaleel, I tell you, it's definitely been a pleasure having you on the show. You got a lot to say, so we definitely got to get you back on, hopefully in the near future, to talk more about the things that's going on with your organization and how that's impacting, things up in Minneapolis and the Twin City areas.
Yeah, I would love that. And I just want to say too that Hennepin County now is now also getting on board, right? So the city got behind it, right? But you can't, I love what your co-host said. He talked about you can't just have a city get behind it, right? You need the state and the government, right? We need all of us getting behind it. So now Hennepin County has gotten behind this work. And I really believe with the city and the county and the state, we are going to get some things done.
Yeah, and that's what's important, making sure that you make communities safer. And hopefully this time, next year, you'll look back and you'll see all of the good work that between the city, the county, and organization like yours, change starts with community. We push for peace. All these organizations and groups are coming together to make these communities much safer. But most importantly, you got to get to these young people, because you got to get the guns out of the hands of these young guys and even these young girls, because you can do all this work and it just takes, one shooting. And as you stated, you got the first 48 hours to calm that situation down. And a lot of people think of the first. So when you look at the first 48 hours of show, you look at that as the same way. The community has 48 hours to really get a grip and keep this thing from escalating even worse than what it already is.
Hey guys, I just got word. If you all are familiar with the officer-involved shooting in Wolf City, Texas, they just found that officer not guilty.
Wow. Yeah.
So I just got that word. And that's just another loss for words on that one.
Yeah. Well, hey, Jaleel, hey, we want to thank you for taking the time, and and I know you're going to share this podcast with those that follows you on social media, and so this podcast show you can definitely catch the rebroadcast of it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast at. You can check out the rebroadcast of the podcast show. So, Jaleel, we want to thank you, and we want to definitely get you back on to be a guest on You and the Law.
I want to thank you both so much. Thank you both for having me, and happy birthday.
All right. Thank you. All right. Y'all have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.